Hello, everybody. This is Melody Payne from Avalara. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar, Best Practices for Effortless Filing. We have a great presentation lined up for you. I'm really excited to welcome presenter Jeffrey Lutters. Jeffrey is one of our sales engineers here at Avalara and is a subject matter expert on tax processes, and automation. So just a couple of brief housekeeping items before I hand the mic to Jeffrey. Today's presentation will be about 30 minutes, and then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. Your lines are muted, but please use the Q&A box located on the right side of your screen to ask questions at any time during the presentation. Jeffrey is an expert on this topic, so don't be shy and ask away all your filing questions. Lastly, our session will be recorded and sent to you in a follow-up email in case you'd like to forward it to your colleague or revisit it anytime. With that, I'll give the floor to Jeffrey.
Oh, thank you so much, Melody, and thank you all for taking the time today. So we're going to walk through quite a few things today. So first off, kind of while my little logo is up here, a little background. I've been doing transaction tax automation for well over a decade. I actually did the count last week, and I personally worked with a little over 5,700 companies with automating compliance here in the U.S. and also international across a myriad of different platforms. And certainly when we talk about returns, that kind of goes hand in hand with automation. So we'll kind of bring that to life today. So what are we going to talk about? So one of the things I think that really is the strongest value for having this call today is being able to share kind of some of the things that we see across the U.S. And so the fact is, I mean, all of you work in your industries, within your companies, within your verticals, and you may understand that well. But for myself, I get to sit across a lot of different companies in a lot of different areas. And there's just things that we learn as a company and also I individually about, some of the challenges that are out there. And so I'll kind of walk through some of the business process and different market challenges that are out there. In addition, I'm going to talk kind of about how Avalara fits into that picture. And, of course, the most exciting part, the third piece, I'll bring it to life, and we'll kind of walk through it. Now, as a lot of you are our current customers, when I actually do the demo, it may look and feel a little different than what you're used to. So about 8 months ago, Avalara launched a brand new user interface to AvaTax. So still the same tax engine behind the scenes, but just a cleaner, easier interface for the platform. And so all of our new customers are actually on the new user interface. And for our current customers, some of you may have already migrated over to, and some of you on the phone may actually be migrating over to it here in the next 8 months or so. So I'll be showing it to you in the new user interface, but know that all the functionality, everything I'll be showing today, will certainly still live in the traditional AvaTax environment. And then we'll kind of talk about some kind of conclusion areas and certainly next steps. And one of my favorite parts is we'll walk through any kind of questions that you may have. So I know we set aside an hour for this. I think really for me walking through the topic and walking through the product takes about 30 to 35 minutes, as Melody mentioned. And then we'll certainly leave plenty of time to walk through those. And if we don't have a lot of questions, we'll certainly give you some time back in your day. So again, thanks for your time today. So when we talk about how Avalara fits into this picture, so for those of you on the phone today, most of you are currently using AvaTax integrated into different technologies. Again, we tie into over 600 different technologies, whether it's an ERP, a point of sale, an e-com, a CRM like Salesforce, but essentially anywhere you need to capture tax. And there's two ways to interact with AvaTax, so kind of an estimation of tax and also commitment of tax. And so as part of the estimation process, of course, we can always look at, who that customer is, what documents we have on file for that customer, where we're selling to, make sure that we have the right document for that ship-to location for that point in time. But once we capture all that information on the commit side of it, it really allows us to drive forward to do what we're talking about today. And it's really the idea that as I know your tax information, I certainly know where you have to file that information, allowing us to actually drive that returns process. And so as these different government entities, allow a different type of return, we're going to make sure that we align our return to that. So kind of what I mean is a lot of states now allow e-filing, but still a lot of jurisdictions still require a paper copy. So it's actually mail physical, return out with a physical check. And so we're going to make sure that as we capture this information from across your different systems through AvaTax, that's going to flow very naturally onto the returns process. And to also walk you through kind of what that looks and feels like, but the actual approval process is a lot easier. So for those of you on the phone phone today, I'm sure a lot of you are the ones who are actually doing the returns, and it's not as simple as push a button and it's taken care of by itself. It's really a matter of you collecting and harvesting this information, putting in the return, making sure it's presented properly, and we're going to certainly kind of walk through what the newer version looks and feels like for us. So when we're talking about kind of the current state, this is us talking about some of these key challenges. And so we don't really have the slide as part of this, but in the upper right-hand side, you see a little tiny iceberg. That's a little background on the iceberg. Is the idea is kind of, an iceberg, what you see above ground or above water is only a small part of the actual iceberg. And this really calls out the idea, when you look at kind of what's above water, maybe it's the idea that I have to figure out tax, but behind the scenes, under the water, there's so many different things that you have to understand and do, and returns are definitely part of that. So people in the organization within the organization, not necessarily yourselves, may not understand kind of the time and effort and everything that goes into these returns. It's just something that, is handled, so it's not a problem. But the folks who do it certainly understand that it is not quite so easy, especially for a company that might be growing into different markets, expanding, maybe acquired somebody. So maybe I'm dealing with 5 states today, and now I'm going to be in 10 states. And as we all know, and I'll talk about in a moment here, not all states are created equal. So some states are a lot more painful than other states. So what are some of the challenges that we see across kind of the current returns process? So number one is really the idea of the filing calendar, and this is going to echo out the idea that, number one, as you expand into new areas or into new markets, you're going to have to start doing returns in new states. But also the frequency may change. As you sell a higher volume into a market, maybe it's going to go from an annual to a quarterly or to a monthly return. And making sure that as you know when these returns are due, making sure that they're being filed on time. And so, as a lot of you probably know as well, a lot of these different returns have different dates that you have to actually file them. So some states are going to be the 15th, other states are the 20th, other states are the 25th, other states are last day of the month. And so you have to make sure that as you're compiling this information and doing the return, that it's being filed on time. So kind of two-sided there. Number one, a lot of states also will make sure that if you file on time, you're going to get a benefit. You're going to get a vendor discount or a timely filing discount. But essentially, there's money you get to save if you file on time. But if you miss that date, now you have penalties, interest, and everything else that starts coming with it. And so these dates are really, really important. And I think one of the things that is kind of the undercurrent here is, as you're going through, it is critical these returns be submitted on time for when they're due for that jurisdiction. But you know what? There's other things going on in your life and in obviously your work life as well. So if there's other fires that are going on or other things that you have to address, whatever you're doing has to get put on hold to make sure these returns are done on time. And there's so many times I talk with folks where, the perfect storm, where the time that they have to actually do the return is also when they have these 4 other projects that are hitting. And so even though it may not be as burdensome to submit the return, it can be a real headache tracking when all these returns are due, and also making sure that you have focused time to make sure that they're being submitted on time when you have so many other projects pulling you in different directions. Which kind of leads me to that second part here is, obviously we have month end, we're going through, we're reconciling our information. But at the same time, you may also have different technologies or different areas you keep tax in. Maybe you keep your use tax, driving mostly from your ERP, but mostly your sales tax obligation, seller's use tax obligation coming from e-commerce or from point of sale, kind of pulling all this information together to make sure that it's presented properly on your return. Even more so if you're doing a consolidated return across different parts of your company that may actually use different technologies. And so I work with a lot of companies that maybe they acquired somebody and they rolled them up into the same company, but they're running 2 different ERPs. But when it comes time to do the return, it's one return. So again, we're trying to pull all this information from different places, compile it, and then always make sure and double check to make sure those numbers always align. So simply putting numbers on a return is not so easy across different systems, but also as you have to populate, let's say you're doing, one return for like a state of Washington, but you have to break out your jurisdictional values, and so kind of how much sale you have per jurisdiction. So even though you have one form and you got all the information together, now you have to start breaking it out and putting it on the form in the right place. Again, this is painful stuff that you have to do. Number 3, obviously as you're having this communication with the states, they love to send out notices, whether it's something new that you have to respond to or something you have to do, or changes that may occur within that state or that jurisdiction. But the fact is, it's just more noise that's coming at you. It's things that come to your desk and are in your inbox that you have to try and work through. It may have an impact to your business. It may not. It may be a call for you to start doing some activity. You have to respond to something or research something. But basically, I kind of think is the notices that phone call that's coming in the middle of a busy day that you have to answer, but now all of a sudden it puts everything else on hold, that they're just headaches. And then number 4, when we talk about and I echoed this a little bit earlier, it's just a lot of time that you're doing this. And so I think what's kind of the undercurrent for number 4 is it's not so much always the time that's being spent, but again, it's when you have to commit the time to this. So again, when these returns are due, making sure that you set aside time on that day to make sure that things are, compiled and filed correctly. And all of a sudden, it doesn't allow you as much flexibility, so that when you have higher value projects or things that are more important in your business, you can't quite be as agile because you're kind of locked down to doing these returns. And again, one of the things I'm sure you've heard about with AvaTax, when we talk about kind of the core of what you want to outsource around tax compliance, is those things that are, high risk, high pain, high time investment, but no real value added for your company. It's kind of the same idea of why you would use AvaTax to figure out the tax is absolutely the same reason why you would look at us to do the returns, because returns are even more of a time commitment with no real value add to your company. It's just something you have to do because you're operating a business. Now, one of the things I echoed earlier, and so this slide kind of covers some returns and other things, but essentially the echo here is that different states are not created equal, and different states have very unique rules. And so on my screen, it's a little bit small, but essentially you have Missouri. You have some unique requirements about how you file. I'll kind of call out Colorado, or any of these states where you have the locally administered, like a Louisiana, Colorado, where as you're collecting tax within the state, and as we all know, within a tax, there's going to be a state level, a county level, a city or parish level or city level. And you're going to have to collect tax at those different jurisdiction levels. But within these states, you also have to do returns at those same levels. So in Louisiana, you have to do one return for all of your aggregated, state-level sales, separate return for all your parish, which is kind of what they call their counties, separate return for the local cities. So now, you're talking, one transaction that's broken out over 3 different jurisdictions. You also have 3 returns that go hand in hand with that. And it's fascinating to myself as I do so much work with returns and so many different customers that there's some really interesting stories out there. And so I think my favorite one is Alabama, where basically there's become a pretty strong distrust of how, local governments can operate and how they handle money. And so when you actually submit your returns, again, state level, local counties and cities, you actually do it to a third party, like a CPA, that handles that money on behalf of the local governments. And so it's fascinating to me that when you have all these returns you have to do, the return may or may not actually be with the government or it may be with a local CPA. And there's just a lot of complexity that you have to go through to make sure these returns are being filed on time. And so I think one of the things that you want to make sure you walk away with is maybe I operate in 10 states, but maybe my states are, like a Massachusetts or a Pennsylvania or New Jersey where things are just a little simpler. And then all of a sudden I've launched new markets and now I'm in California and I have to do these random prepayments and how I forecast my information. I do a Colorado or Louisiana and now I have these local jurisdictions. So simply adding 1 or 2 states may actually add a lot of complexity that it may also be very different from what you're used to today. And kind of one of the things that I'm sure we're all aware of, but a lot of states are certainly changing how they look at nexus and kind of redefining this idea of where as a company you may have to collect tax. And I think there's so much focus put up front, whether it's economic nexus, the idea of how much sales, what your volume of sales are into a state, affiliate nexus, how you network and get your brand out there. But there's these different rules that are out there. People think about the sales tax implication. But the backside of sales tax implication, of course, is the returns. And so as you are in these new states, you're an AvaTax user, so it's very easy to turn on those states, make sure you have all the rates and taxability rules correct. But on the back end, you still have to do the return. So there can certainly be a lot of complexity that goes hand in hand with certain states. So kind of what does that flow look like? And so this is kind of walking through, what is a flow of tax information. So up front, we have the idea of you're collecting information. I'm sorry, on my screen it's really small. So within your world, you're collecting information in different places, like a point of sale, ERP, really wherever you have to actually, apply tax. And so I'm quoting my customers. I'm actually invoicing my customers. You're using AvaTax to make sure that we're applying that tax appropriately. So again, we're looking at the who, the what, and the where to apply the tax appropriately in that system. And then on the back end, you have to try and pull that information together. So when it comes time, again, for the returns, you can have different technologies, different parts of your business. You might have retail stores. You might have other places to get all your information together and to make sure to really drive the actual return preparation. So making sure that you have the right return, because returns do change pretty frequently. So making sure you have the right return with the information being filed in the right fashion with them. Also make sure that it's being filed on time with what that jurisdiction expects. And then, of course, once you have that beyond the actual submittal, you have to actually pay the jurisdiction. So maybe internally you have to go get, internal sign-off for the different checks or for the certain values. But there's kind of an effort that goes on your side beyond, getting the money to make sure that things are being prepared and submitted properly. Maybe you can start that ACH or that transfer, or maybe somebody else in your company has to. But basically there's just more steps that go beyond the idea that I'm submitting a return, but I also have to hand this money back over to the proper jurisdiction. And then, of course, on the back of that, making sure that everything is reconciled and adjusted and kind of, tied directly into your system and everything checks out. So how does that align to Avalara? So very similar idea. You're already using AvaTax upfront to make sure that we are calculating the tax in kind of the beginning of the circle. So we're figuring out the who, the what, and the where. All of you are certainly aware of our reporting functionality that you can very easily pull the information, maybe have it aligned to what jurisdiction you're collecting in or off of, top line tax details. Basically, you can pull information out to then help drive you the returns process. But what I'm going to show you in a few moments here is basically within our system, as we already have that information, you let us know what returns you have to file. We're going to grab that information, and actually it's going to automatically flow onto those returns for you. So we're able to kind of remove that human element and allow you still to go through and actually approve it and make sure everything makes sense. But the idea of trying to pull information out, aggregate it, put it in the right form, in the right way, that's going to be automated for you. So on the very top of this circle is the idea of a liability worksheet, which I'll show you also in the solution. But essentially, this is the idea that we have now harvested all the information. We have and we've aligned it to what returns you have to file, and we're showing it to you for your approval. So you go through and actually approve that return. That allows us to actually drive the return. We're going to make sure that it is filed in the right format, whether it's an e-file or whether it's a paper copy. We're going to make sure that it's filed on time for when that jurisdiction expects that return to be submitted. And we're also going to transfer the money appropriately to that government. So as part of the Avalara solution, you do one ACH to us for your total tax exposure. We then break that out, and we pay all the jurisdictions their exact amount. So as we file those returns, we're also going to keep an archive of any kind of payment vouchers, prepayment vouchers, the actual submitted returns. And so you actually have physical copies of all the returns that you have submitted as well. So if you want to go ahead and pull copies of those down and keep them on your, SharePoint or somewhere else, by all means you can. But as long as you're an Avalara customer, we're going to keep all of the returns for you. So when you're with us for 30 years, we're going to have 30 years of returns in there for you. And that final piece, the notice management. So understand, as part of the Avalara platform, we actually have a dedicated team here to help you with notices. And so as those notices are coming out to you, hopefully, as we take over that power of attorney, the notice will just come directly to us. But let's just say it still does end up at your desk there, by email or an actual paper, mailed out letter notice. You can submit that to Avalara, and we're actually going to work through that notice. Number one, initial response to it, and then the whole path to remediation. And I'll show you in a moment also within AvaTax kind of what a notice might look like, where some of the notes may show itself. But essentially the idea is you're going to hand that to us, and we can take that off your plate. So again, one more thing that we're going to give you more time back and more flexibility to choose in your calendar and your schedule what's important to do when. On the left-hand side, I think the three things that are important to call out here is we're going to make sure that's accurate. We're going to make sure that we already have the tax information. Like I was saying earlier, for those states where you have to break out that tax values for different jurisdictions, again, if we've already captured it, it's very easy for us to have that information flow onto the return for you. Extremely efficient. So within our platform, last year we did 1.2 million returns for our customers, and that covers both U.S. and Canada. And a little bit later, I'll also talk about if you have returns in other countries around the world, we can certainly help with those as well. It's just a little bit of a different path. So really the focus today is, the efficiency tied to U.S. and Canadian returns. And then finally, the integration. So again, if we're already tied into your systems and grabbing that tax information, it's very easy for us to drive that return and have all of your tax information and all of your returns living in one place, again in the cloud, easy to access. So what does a month look like? So again, we're going to have this information that's going to be living within the system. We're going to, on the end of the day, on the 5th day of a month, we're going to grab the tax information from Avatax and create what we call, again, as a liability worksheet. So essentially, we're aligning that tax information up to the return. And we're going to ask that between the 5th day of the month and the 10th day of the month that you come in here and you actually approve the liability worksheet. And I'll show you as simple as clicking approve if the numbers make sense for you. If they don't make sense, go make a change. Easy to refresh the page and then click approve. But essentially, let's say, and I get this question a lot, so what happens when changes happen on the 6th or the 7th or the 8th? As long as you haven't, submitted that, click approve that return, you can make those changes. It will refresh in the system, and then you can approve. So we just ask that you sometime between the 5th and the 10th, you come through and approve that worksheet for us. We're then going to start the ACH, or actually you're going to initiate the ACH to us for your total tax exposure. And then we're going to turn around and make sure that we have that money to start paying. So if you have returns that are due on the 15th day of the month, we're going to have that money that transfers, turns around, and start paying the jurisdictions as needed, submitting those returns on time as needed. Again, 15th, 20th, 25th, last day of the month. And the idea is at the end of the month, again, we're going to update that admin console with all of those submitted returns. And so I'll actually show you that actually, it's the actual return that was submitted with that state. On the left-hand side, again, all the same things that I echoed so far. So we're going to go ahead and not only produce the actual returns and the e-filing, but we're also going to give you some reports that you can drive for reconciliation or adjustment, kind of that last piece of the puzzle for us. So last thing I'm going to speak about before I kind of bring the solution live, so we're kind of in summation what we're talking about here. So as Avatax is already tied into your systems to make sure that we're applying tax appropriately, it's a very seamless integration to make sure the information flows onto a returns process. We can create those returns and drive that money out to the local governments as needed. So it's going to be integrated into your systems. It's going to make sure that the right amount of liability is being remitted out. It's going to not only do the filing, but also the actual money transfer. Highly efficient for you to come in and actually approve those returns. We're going to make sure that it's accurate. And kind of the last thing, which I haven't really talked much about, but really the idea of risk associated with this. So beyond what I was saying up front of making sure that the return is being filed on time and we might miss it, it might be some P&I that might tie to it. I kind of allude to the idea that some of these local jurisdictions change their forms pretty regularly. So making sure that you have the right form, because if you submit it on that form, they may reject it, and now you have penalty and interest coming back into play here again. But again, I want to tie it back to what I was saying earlier about just priorities. And so there may be other priorities that are coming due for you to kind of look at that is even a higher risk for your company. And so you may have to pull off of that to help drive this returns process. And so if you're able to automate, it really allows you to choose, where you put your priorities. And if there's things that have a higher risk for your company, you can really dedicate your time to that instead of making sure that this return is being filled out today, because it's got to be submitted today. So some of the stories that we've certainly heard, and it's interesting, I've actually worked with two of these companies myself. So we have a candy company that actually has a myriad of different platforms, whether it's e-commerce, point of sale. They have some direct sales. Actually, it's funny, I look at my desk right now and actually have one of the little candy jars sitting on my desk from them. And so they were able to bring it all together and able to make sure that they were confident that when they're calculating the tax, it's going to be compiled and able to flow naturally onto those returns. And the other customer I worked with here on the right-hand side is an appliance company that's based here in the Pacific Northwest. And, of course, I'm calling in today from Seattle, Washington. But as they kind of launched into this market, there were some rule changes that happened, and there were over 90 different tax jurisdictions that changed on a form. And they were manually trying to compile their tax information and break it out across these jurisdictions. And being able to automate it, again, having information in our system that just flows onto the return made their life very, very easy, where they could simply click a button saying approve. They're trying to go through and make this all align to what the actual return expects us to see. So with that, I'm actually going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. So one of the things that Melody may have mentioned earlier for us was, and actually Melody, with that, I'm just going to make sure. Do you see Avatax on your screen currently for us?
Yep, I see it.
All right, perfect. So one of the things that Melody mentioned earlier for us is, please, as we're going through, if you do have questions, please continue to put them into the chat box. Melody's going to compile them and kind of be my questioner here in a moment. And she mentioned earlier, bring all of your questions to me. So we'll see how many of them I can answer off the top of my head. But we'll certainly go through those and see and get you some answers on them. So here it is. So as I mentioned up front, a lot of the information I'm going to show you here I kind of talked through already. So now it's going to be kind of just really bringing it to life for us. As I also mentioned at the very beginning of the call, we have launched a new user interface, and so Avatax may look different than how it looks for yourself when you log in, but feel really confident that all the functionality I show you today is going to still work in your current user interface for Avatax. Similar idea, but as you see right here, it's a much cleaner, more modern look to it. And as we go throughout this year, if you are in the old version, we'll be bringing you over to the new version. Again, with all your information, no disruption in your actual process. Again, just making it easier for you to interact with your information. So up front here, we just have our returns information. And you'll see there's 5 different things that we consider kind of classify under returns. So number 1, we have that power of attorney. So again, you can digitally just sign it through the solution instead of having to do paper going back and forth. And so this is going to allow us to take over that response to go ahead and, act in your authority with these states and these jurisdictions. It also allows kind of the banking information to be transferred to us for where the information is coming, or where the tax money is coming from for you. So we'll end on notices. So for now, we'll kind of work through these first. So first things first, this is what we call the filing calendar. But essentially, this is you telling us, hey, these are the returns I have to do. This is my registration number. Here's the frequency that we have to actually file this return. And with that, I'm going to take a moment and kind of show you how easy it is to add a new form. And so here, I will, as I mentioned earlier, I'm sitting in Washington. So let me do a Washington form. So when you choose a state, we're going to give you a little graphic saying these are the potential forms that we can file for you. Which one do you want to use? This is the normal SST form, so we're going to use that form. Again, if you're already established an e-filer, you're just giving us your credentials, your password. You don't have to change anything. We're not, we're just going to keep what you already established going forward for you. As far as frequency, so if this Washington's usually a monthly return, so I don't really have a lot of choices here. But if you have a monthly or a quarterly or an annual, you're going to tell us, when do you want to start filing? Do you want us to file in the current period or wait until next period? Let's go ahead and just grab an address. And one of the things you'll see in this new user interface as well is that we have a lot of graphical representation to kind of bringing your addresses to life. So again, this is my headquarters. This is actually the new Avalara headquarters we moved into a few months here. And so we're based in kind of downtown Seattle. Other information that we're required to have is, again, your business identification, your EIN, your name, your phone number, and EIN, and hit save. And really, it's as easy to turn on a return as that. And then we're going to take that information and be able to align your tax information each month to these returns. And so, as I mentioned earlier, and I should mention too, so for those of you who may have multiple companies, so maybe within your Avalara account you may have 4 or 5 different companies, you can very easily set up returns that echo each company's requirements. So maybe one of your companies is in 10 states, one's in 5 states. As you've gone through and set up Nexus uniquely for each of those, you can very easily set up the returns that align for those for each company. So if you have 3 companies and they all file in Washington, we can absolutely do 3 separate returns for each of them. And you'll see kind of in the very top here, so this is the company that I'm working within here, but it's very easy for me to kind of flip back and forth between companies. So as mentioned earlier, we have this idea of a liability worksheet. So let me go back to a month when I know I have a lot of good tax information here. Oh, let me do May. So essentially what's going to happen in here is we're going to tell you kind of top line. So for this month, for your company, we had total sales across the U.S. about 1.3, about 1.2 of that was taxable. You collected tax about 102. On top of that, you actually had some use tax that flowed into our system. So we had a total purchases that we're accruing on of about $10,000, of which is about $600 worth of use tax exposure. Now you'll see too that as we look at the tax collected and then also the amount that we need to remit for use tax, actual amount due is actually less Because realize I mentioned earlier, when you're filing these things on time, you're going to get a vendor discount, or also called a timely filing discount, which is kind of a weird idea. Again, as the state says, if you file on time when I tell you to, you get to keep some of my money. So that's what you're seeing here reflected, is there's actually a timely filing. So we're actually saving this customer about $2,000 here, making sure that this thing is being filed on time. So let's hop into some of these states. So for Florida, again, so the idea here, again, this is an older month. But if this is a new month here, obviously approved wouldn't be showing. This is my month. This is my total sales, my taxable sales, the amount of tax that's been collected. Again, we have a vendor discount in play here. So if everything makes sense and I want to file this return, you literally just click approve. So as you're looking through this, if the values are aligning to what you're expecting for the states, you're just going approve, approve, approve. Details allows you to dive into a little bit more of kind of where the information is, exactly what the vendor discount is. But basically, if you're looking through this and the numbers aren't aligning to what you expect, maybe you forgot to process a refund, or somebody put a refund, but they actually put it as of a tax date, in April, so it's not showing in my May, return right now or what have you. Or I should say in March, it's not showing in my May return covering April information. You go back and you change that tax date. You just click this, and it'll actually refresh with all of the new information for you. If you're using this for use tax, same idea. So again, in Connecticut, I have my sales for my top line, then I have my purchase here on the bottom side, again, with the total amount that's due for those. Now, as you may see here, I have some of these that actually have these yellow flags. So again, it's a demo environment, so you kind of want to walk through a few different scenarios here. And if you remember me talking about earlier, we had the idea that within Louisiana, as you collect tax, there's actually a state level, there's a parish level, and a city level, and you have to actually do returns at those different levels. So what this little yellow flag is telling me is I have turned on Nexus and I'm collecting tax at a jurisdictional level, but I don't have the return turned on yet. I don't have it activated within Avatax. And so in our Avalara speak, so we call collecting and not remitting. So you have money that you're collecting at a parish or a city level that's not going back out to them. Hey, do you know about that? So we've tried to build in a lot of logic to make sure that's called out to our customers. And if you want to, you can actually just click here and add those local jurisdiction returns on. Or maybe you go back in and you turn those jurisdictions off. You're not supposed to be collecting tax in those jurisdictions. But essentially, we try and have the logic that's built in here to kind of call out those things that need your attention. But again, this is going to be built for you end of the day on the 5th day of the month, and so we ask you to come in here before the end of the 10th day of a month and click approve and really drive that return process. But as you go throughout here, so if all the returns make sense, I click approve on all of them, you're done. Avalara will then kind of receive that transfer from you for the total value, break that out, and pay each jurisdiction the value they expect on that return. And then we also provide you back, obviously, those returns. So what does that look like? So the second tab here is this filed returns. So you know what, let me just go last year. I got more information there last year. So here's the returns. And so I can pull very specific, I just want to look at certain months or anything else. I just pull last year, and you know what, let me just pull Florida here. So for Florida, again, the DR15 is the form I have to file. It's a monthly return for $6,000. And so if I want to actually pull these copies down, I can go through and one by one if I wanted to, just see what that return looks like. And I'll pull it down. Let me just show it. So here's my Florida return, again, with my value of sales, and here's the actual tax due and remitted. And so you have all the copies of the actual returns that were filed on your behalf. As I mentioned earlier, if you wanted to go ahead, let's say I pulled a search that was just for a 1-month period or a 2-month period, you can actually just export this, and it will actually dump all of those copies out for you. Or if you wanted to look at any specific one, you can very easily, expand any of these and actually look at the actual return that's tied to those. So as I mentioned earlier, as long as you're an Avalara customer, we're going to keep all these on file for you. So they will always be here for your access. Now, last thing I want to mention, tax notices. And so, again, this is the best example for this audience here. But in this example here, we had a notice that was actually submitted, and this is actually a lodging. So I'm not sure if folks on the phone today use us for lodging content. But essentially here, it was reached out to us, and we received this on the 14th, went through, and we did initial response. And it was really more of an awareness notice, and so we were able to close that out. But let's say you have a more involved process, and so you can actually have the case information, and then all of the comments that are tied to it are reflected directly here for you. As we have different things that we're working through, and we can attach to them, you can see them here as well. So basically, you can easily log in, see when these notices are coming through, when we initially receive them, what our path to resolution is, and kind of the notes associated with it. again, one more thing off of your desk that you don't have to worry about, included as part of our service. But we want to make sure that you also have that visibility that as we're working through those notices, kind of where we're at in that process. And if there's any notices, or if you need to communicate with us, obviously you can get through the different notices as well. So with that being said, that's kind of returns. So you're going to tell us where you have to actually file. We're going to grab your tax information. We're going to create this liability worksheet for you to come through and approve it as we do those returns. We're going to keep them on file for you. And if you get notices, you can actually submit those to us, and we will take care of those notices for you. So with that, I can go ahead and kind of spin back up the deck here for us. And so, Melody, I think it might be easier if I can go ahead and just use the one on my desktop here. So if you can just confirm that that slideshow is showing properly for you.
Yep, I see it.
All right. So let's summarize this all together and kind of bring this back. So we have a paper process that, again, has no real value added for your company, that you don't really get a chance to say when you're doing these things. The numbers come to you at a certain point in time, and you have to get them on these forms by a certain time, and you have to get them submitted on a certain time. And so you're kind of held constrained by all these different schedules and these different dates, the 15th and 20th and 25th and last day of the month, that is really just pulling you away from allowing you to control your day and what's really effective for you. So the idea is that in Avalara, we're going to be accurate because we already have your tax information, so it's flowing across. You don't have to worry about miskeying values onto different cells or pulling one thing across from one jurisdiction and putting it in the wrong jurisdiction on the form. We have it naturally mapped, and so it's going to flow across onto those returns for you. We're going to make sure that these returns are being filed on time for you, and it's a really efficient process. So as you saw, you're clicking buttons to actually do it instead of trying to drive all this information on the returns. We're going to make sure that we have the right form. We're going to make sure that, again, it's being submitted in the right fashion. We're going to empower you with the information on the back end to make sure that you can run reports and easily reconcile that information back. We're going to make sure that, number one, it's filed on time, so obviously reducing risk. But also, as I mentioned earlier, we're allowing you to focus on things that have a higher risk for your company than simply getting these returns out on time to the right jurisdiction. And I'm sure we've all had that scramble at times when something else is pulling away and all of a sudden we had to do this return and it was kind of due in 2 minutes kind of thing. So a little fire drill to get it all done. You have a very easy and efficient and clean audit trail, so easy to pull these returns to substantiate, what you've filed. Easy to get this information for either internal or for, a state audit. And really, all this boils down to this is something that has a high risk, high exposure, high time investment for no value add. And so really, you can go back to the things that are more important to you and to your role and be able to really offload just the returns process. And so with that, I think it's time for a little Q&A. So, Melody, are we lined up with 55 million questions? Or do you think we have one or two questions?
Jeffrey, not quite yet, but I just wanted to thank you for presenting today. This was awesome information. And then, as Jeffrey noted, we're going to go ahead and open to any questions you may have. So as a reminder, you can use the chat box to put in any questions you have for Jeffrey. And while we wait for questions to roll in, Jeffrey, one question I commonly get from customers is that when is kind of, in your experience, the threshold where people should think about automating filing?
Oh, sure. Yeah, so it's not tied to states, because I mentioned earlier, I have customers that are in one state, but they have locals, and they want to offload that one state. It tends to be, in my experience, so there's a few things that come into play. So number one, if somebody's been doing it kind of their own way, they're in the same states, 5 states can be accomplished pretty easily. What happens when those people start being assigned to new tasks, or maybe somebody new is coming into a role, the amount of effort to try and ramp up and learn how to do these states properly, it makes sense if you're changing over kind of roles, responsibilities, to look at outsourcing at that point in time. As you start growing, once you start hitting 10 states, this is a pretty strong time investment as you grow beyond 5 states into 10 states. And I should mention as well, so if you bringing in, maybe I encounter this too, so maybe I'm in 5 states with my company and we just bought somebody and they only have 5 states, but those 5 states are different, and so now overnight I have to go get 5 other states ramped up, pull information from 2 different systems. And so The magic question for me, Melody, is that really it can be companies of any size in any market that may be driven by change, or maybe as they're trying to be leaner and more efficient in their financial teams, they're trying to offload those things that just really aren't core, and they're kind of just pulling people away from what they should be doing. Or as companies expand, as they go beyond 5 states, the pain starts to get very, very real, and you start being pulled in different ways on different days to get these things done. So I would say beyond 5, I usually start having more of these conversations. Certainly once you're 10 up to 20, we should talk. There's a very strong investment on your side with resources and financial investment to get these things done that we can easily offload for a very cost-efficient point. Now, with that idea kind of being wrapped up in my mind, Melody, I did have one topic I brought up earlier, and I told everybody I would circle back on, and I haven't yet. So is there a question that relates to what you were just asking, or is it okay if I go off on my little tangent for a moment?
Sure, go ahead.
All right, so everything here I talked about was U.S. and Canadian returns. So around the U.S. return, obviously things are being processed in U.S. dollars. Very easy for us to pull that information. Again, we did it 1.2 million times last year. Canadian returns are a little bit different. We do expect you to be processing into our systems in CAD. Because, again, we have to file these returns in CAD, and so we have to pull the information and file those returns in CAD. We also have to have a dedicated bank account in Canada, and that's really a Canadian requirement, not an Avalara requirement. Now, I mentioned we also do returns in other countries, and so we support a lot of different countries around the world. So obviously EU and non-EU, but European nations we can help through, a lot of Oceania, so Australia and New Zealand. You start looking at Japan, South Korea, South Africa. There's a wide array of different returns we can file for our customers. We also have a myriad of different partners out there that can really cover any country our customers are looking at. Now, returns outside of the U.S. and Canada are a little different because in U.S. and Canada, we can really automate that flow. Internationally, we actually automate part of it, but we still have a human interaction where they're looking through and making sure and kind of giving that human touch these returns. And so there's some back and forth, maybe if you have recoverable input credits and things like that, that you can communicate to us. And you have a dedicated person to help you with other countries outside of U.S. and Canada as well. So I mentioned we do returns around the world, and the demo today was really focused on U.S. and Canada. But if you do have needs in other countries, by all means, let us know. We can help. And I do a lot of that work. So I'd be looking forward to that conversation.
Cool. Jeffrey, we have another question that came in. What happens when I don't get to approve that liability worksheet on time?
Yeah. So here's the thing. You have to file a return, okay? So by not clicking approve, we don't want to not file because that's going to be a whole domino effect. So what happens is basically we lock it at the end of the day on the 10th, and whatever information is in the system is what we will file under. And so we certainly have customers that, they get sick or something else comes up and they don't get a chance to go through and actually click approve. So we're going to file with whatever information is already in the system, and with the idea that if we have to go back and, amend that return or change that return, that's certainly easier to do than not do a return and deal with the ramifications. So we're going to ensure that every single jurisdiction that you set up with a return, we're going to file each time that it's due with whatever information we have in the system.
Great. And then another question, Jeffrey. So you mentioned notice management. Will Avalara actually help the customers to contact the state when we receive a notice?
Yes and no. So notices can cover so many different things, and so I don't want to give just a wide blanket answer, but really the idea is that we're going to have that communication with the state. And so we do this for a lot of companies, for a lot of states, and so there's kind of a communication path that we have that's a little different than you may have. And so we have certain relationships. The two things. And so as part of that path, the idea is as we're taking over that power of attorney, we're going to be that liaison between you and the state. And so for the vast majority of that communication, we'll actually be the ones communicating with the state on your behalf. Now, there are times that notices are around things that are not directly tied to what Avalara is calculating or doing the return on. And so we'd kind of work with you through that process in how to respond to those notices. But for the majority of the ones, especially those that are tied to returns and everything else, Avalara will actually be that voice for you to the state. And so, again, we're trying to take things off of your desk, so we actually become that voice.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Well, I think that's all the questions we've received so far. If we don't have any further questions, this concludes our webinar today. As a reminder, you will receive a follow-up email probably tomorrow with all of the deck information and recording. And Jeffrey, thank you so much for presenting. If you have any follow-up questions, feel free to contact your account manager. And if you're interested in learning more about how filing can apply to your company, your account manager will be the best contact for that. Any final thoughts to share, Jeffrey?
Absolutely. So thank you all for taking the time today. I know you're busy, and this is one of these areas that I never have a customer that offloads returns and comes back 2 months later and says, oh, I want to take it back myself. Essentially, we just had an event last week where it's kind of a user conference that we hosted down in Washington, D.C., and we had hundreds of companies come, and it was really nice to be there and hear from so many companies like, I did this manually for so long, and I'm so excited about finally outsourcing this, and my life is so much easier now. So I would really charge you to entertain this, and I really think that we can make a strong impact in your world. So thanks for taking the time today, and we would love to have the ongoing conversation if it makes sense in your world. So thanks for orchestrating this, Melody.
Thank you. Thanks, Jeffrey. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.
Bye now.